works well for you, and I will begin. In general, Catalan Endgames are one of my favorite topics, and I greatly enjoy such kind of endgames. Because in general, when you're playing with white, you have a small but lasting advantage in a risk-free position. If you see at the database, if you look at my games, you will see that when I play with white, I put my bishop on g2 against pretty much every opening that is played by my opponent. The reason is simple. I really enjoy the pressure generated by this g2 bishop. In many endgames, even if not exactly Catalan endgames, this bishop puts a very annoying pressure on black's position. In order to explain why the Catalan endgames are so unpleasant for black, we need to take a brief look at one of the basic positions for this opening. So this position is going to be reached after the main moves d4, d5, c4, e6, knight f3, knight f6, g3, bishop b7, bishop g2, castle, white makes castle, d takes c4, queen c2. And okay, black, if white manages to regain this c4 pawn, black has one big problem. This problem is related to the development of the c8 bishop. So if black does not manage to develop this bishop at all, our g2 bishop will generate a very annoying pressure along the big diagonal. So we are going to take a look at some examples in which even in the endgame, this bishop creates a lot of pressure because of black's undeveloped queenside. Usually, black manages to develop this bishop via the b7 square. So you know already by playing a6, queen takes c4, b5, queen c2, bishop b7. Grandmaster Boris Avluch has just explained many interesting ideas, of course, from a theoretical perspective. He explained many interesting ideas related to this position, but now I'm going to talk from the perspective of the endgame. And in this lecture, I will prove that the arising endgames are not easy for black, even though the theoretical evaluation can be just equality. So in many cases, when you analyze these positions with a computer, you see that the computer is giving equality all the time, but in practical play, many practical problems persist. So why black will face problems in the end game? Okay, he managed to develop his white squared bishop, but here there is something very important. By playing b5, he weakened the queen sides, and mainly the squares c5 and c6. Now these squares will be problematic in every endgame. Even if black manages to carry out the advance c7, c5, and eventually exchange the central pawns, in the endgame, the squares c5, c6, and b6 will be very problematic for black. And you see that in many cases, white's pieces will manage to invade black's position via one of these squares. So somebody is saying that he cannot hear. What do you guys, can you hear my voice? Okay, so everything is fine. Okay, now I see that the problem is resolved. Yeah, so we are going to look at endgames in which black manages to play c5 and these pawns are exchanged. And also we are going to look at endgames in which the pawn remains on c7, which is a very difficult situation for black. So let me summarize. The difficulty of the Catalan's endgame for black is mainly based on two factors. This is the pressure generated by the g2 bishop, as you can see on this diagram. Here you have a more simplistic case. In some cases, black cannot develop his queenside at all because he does not manage to play b5 on time. And sometimes, even if black manages to play b5, we have this pawn structure in which white will get an advantage due to the weakness of the squares c5, c6, and b6. And as you are going to see, in many cases, black's pieces are tied to the defense of these weak squares. Therefore, white pieces manage to generate a tremendous activity. First of all, I'm going to begin with two examples which feature this situation. When black does not manage to play b5 on time, and the queenside development becomes problematic. And here is I'm going to start with a rather clear example. This is the game Wojtekewicz-Kagan. So knight f3, knight f6, c4, e6. This is a possible move order. Okay, we will not consider the position from a theoretical point of view. D takes c5, queen d1, rook d1, bishop c5. This is an interesting theoretical line. Even Grandmaster Davorin Kulashevich wrote an opening database for modern chess in which he recommends this variation for black. Now, white should play knight d2, and here, of course, the critical continuation for black is c3, because if white manages to recapture the c4 pawn by keeping his pawn structure intact, okay, black will suffer for nothing. Therefore, black first prefers to give the pawn back by spoiling white's pawn structure. Of course, this is not one-sided decision, as Boris Vuk explained in his lecture. In such structures, white will profit from the B file, which can be used for the purposes of the queenside pressure. So in this game, which I'm currently showing, black went for castle, knight takes c4, knight d5. And here, okay, you can think for about 30 seconds, can you suggest a reliable move for white? Of course, you have many options in this position, but what is the most principled continuation for whites? Yes, I see many good answers. In general, in such positions, you should try to exchange the pieces, the opponent's pieces, which stay on bishop. So if somehow you manage to exchange these two knights, the pressure along the diagonal would be tremendous. Also, we could also consider exchanging this c5 bishop. Our point is to have our opponent playing only with this c8 bishop, which will be stuck on the king side, on the queen side. So white went for knight e5, knight takes c5, knight takes c5, f6, knight c4. Now you see that this knight is not stable at all. If black wants to play b6 and bishop b7, then we can capture the knight by means of rook takes d5. So he went for knight b6, and here a very important move, knight a5. In general, in such endgames and in such structures, the a5 square is very suitable for the knight, because by putting our knight on a5, we put pressure on b7, but also when our opponent goes for b6, the knight will immediately occupy the important c6 square. In the future examples, you will see how important is the c6 square in Catalan endgames. So here, black went for rook b8, bishop d2, rook c1 is coming. So you see, the position is symmetric, but black just cannot develop his pieces because of the g2 bishop. This is a typical, very, very unpleasant Catalan endgame for black. Objectively speaking, this position is close to worst for black, I think. So knight d5, rook c1, bishop b6, knight c4, these moves are pretty much obvious. And here, once again, just a quick answer from you. What should white play? Okay, I already see good answers. Yeah, of course, here knight e3, just exchanging black's remaining active pieces. The d5 knight, also you can see that the c7 bishop is in danger now. Take, bishop takes e3, and you can see that there is nothing on the way of our bishops now. Our bishops are dominating the entire board. And here the game ended pretty quickly. Bishop e5, bishop c5, rook e8, now f4. Actually, bishop c5 was an important intermediate move, because now bishop b2 can be met by rook c2, and it turns out that this b2 bishop has run out of squares. So bishop c7, take on a7, and here the game is practically over. You see that until the very end of the game, black's bishop remained on c8, remained out of play. So if black fails to develop his c8 bishop, the pressure could be tremendous in these endgames. Now, I just wanted to provide one more instructive example, which is based on the same theme. So this is the game Nenad Shuava against okay, Claudio Popper, a player that I don't know. Now, this is the same opening variation, knight d2, Kezo, knight c4, knight g4, e3, rook b8, h3. And here, just a quick question. What should black play? Maybe in order to make it easier for you, I can flip the board, because from time to time we can be from the other side of the board. Yes, I see many good answers here. Since the passivity of this bishop is black's main problem, he should give priority to the development of this bishop. Therefore, the best move would be b5, just to make room for the bishop. But even here, let's suppose that we have this position, knight d2, knight f6. White just proceeds with modest development of his pieces. White retains some advantage in this kind of endgames, because of two main factors. This b5 pawn creates a lot of weaknesses, as I said earlier. So this square is weak, c5, c6 square is problematic. Also, another very important difference in such structures, the d2 knight is more flexible than the knight on c6. White can use the d2 knight in order to fight for the c5 square. For example, you should know this typical scheme: a3, rook c1, b4, knight b3, knight c5. And of course, we should not we should not forget the lasting pressure along the big diagonal. If black manages to exchange the white squared bishops, his problems will be not over because of the weakness of the c6 square. So remember, this advance b7, b5 weakens a lot of squares. The game went in a different way, knight f6. And here, maybe if I give you only 20 seconds, you will find the right answer. Of course, 100% correct answers. So black's main idea is to slowly neutralize our pressure by playing bishop d7, rook d8, bishop e8, exchange all the rooks, and the end game will be pretty equal. But we play knight e5, preventing bishop d7 and clearing the way of the g2 bishop. This is a very instructive move. So rook d8, rook takes d8, knight takes d8, bishop d2. Here he went for knight d7. Once again, this is a wrong decision. Knight d7. Why this is a wrong decision? Because the c8 bishop should be our priority. Therefore, black should have tried to play b6. And here I analyzed something similar, the following endgame. For example, a3, you will see why. Bishop b7, bishop b4. Let's suppose that we exchange the bishops. We exchange another pair of bishops and rook d1. Once again, black did not solve his problems, because even if we are in the end game, black must recon with this with the weakness of the c6 square. As I thought in the later examples, you will see how important this square is. The game followed with knight d7, bishop c3, b5, and here a very important intermediate move, rook d1. Rook d1, and it turns out that black cannot develop his pieces without making further concessions. So b takes c4, knight d7, bishop takes d7, rook takes d7, and white is almost winning because we have an open position. White has tremendous piece activity, and of course black has problems which are related to the pawn structure. So the game went rook c8, a4, king f8, and here instead of the dubious bishop b7, white should have just played bishop f1, and it's not clear how can black keep his pawns, how black can keep the material, because king e8 is well met by rook d1. Now both pawns on c4 and g7 are in danger, so white is winning. So guys, so far you have seen how dangerous and annoying can be the pressure along the diagonal h1, a8. Now I will examine some cases in which black managed to exchange the white squared bishops, but the weaknesses on the queen side give white a very annoying and stable advantage. Here there is one. I will start with two absolutely model games in which you will see the most important ideas for white in general, and then I will provide many examples which feature more specific ideas. So the first game is played by Grandmaster Tommy Nibak. This is really a very nice model game in which white demonstrated all the important ideas. So let's start from the opening just to get an idea. This is the position we have seen on many occasions. Bishop d2, bishop e4, queen c1, bishop b7. This is what Boris advocated in his lecture. Here, white played bishop f4, one of the most natural moves. Knight d5, knight c3, take, c5. At first glance, it seems that black managed to solve all the important opening problems. So the b7 bishop is developed. We have a symmetrical structure. Black will be in time to complete the development of his pieces. But what is the potential problem? If white manages to exchange the white squared bishops and the queens, the endgame will be a bit tricky for black because of these queenside weaknesses. So first of all, white gains an important tempo, rook d1, queen b6. Now knight e5, a typical exchange. Bishop takes g2, king takes g2, f6, knight d3. As you are going to see a bit later, this is the perfect square for the knight. Why? Because we are going to exchange the queens. Also, we are going to exchange one of our knights for a bishop. And maybe we can exchange a pair of rooks, and this will be the perfect situation because our rook will operate along the c file, while the d file will be closed by our knight. Also, being on d3, the knight is quite flexible. Depending on the circumstances, the knight can go either to c5 or to f4, or even b4. Let's see how all this happened in the game. Bishop e7, queen e4. Now, by playing in this way, we try to force the exchange of the queens. Now we have reached an endgame. Take. So we have a typical Catalan endgame, and this is the first important position of the game. So how should white play in this position? Maybe it will be better if you think for about 1 minute, and then I will provide an explanation. White has an advantage. The advantage is obvious. Black has multiple queenside weaknesses. What is the best technical decision? Okay, I see some interesting ideas. All of your suggestions are quite decent and can be played. Yes. So when your opponent has weaknesses, weak pawns or weak squares, a typical device is to exchange one pair of rooks. In this way, you just eliminate any possible counterplay. So after exchanging one pair of rooks, we are trying to make his remaining rook passive. Therefore, Toby Nibak started with rook c7, with the idea to exchange one pair of rooks. Rook c7, rook c7, rook d7. Am I going to exchange the remaining rooks? No, of course not. I play rook c8, and let's take a look at this position after knight d3. When I think about Catalan endgames, this is a model position that I have in mind. So one pair of rooks, my rook is active, the rook of our opponent is quite passive, and I have a knight on d3. This is the best square for the knight in this endgame, because you see that I can play knight c5 when I want. Also, the knight closes the d file, so black cannot create any counterplay. Maybe later in this lecture, we are going to say that in these pawn structures, the control of the C file is more important than the control of the D file. So even if my knight is not on D3, the C file is more important because it's far away from the opponent's king, while our king can easily go to E1 and take the D file under control. But this is another subtlety which is very important. So how the game went? King E7, knight C5, making use of the C5 square, which was weakened by B5, rook B6, and here another very technical move, B4. Always in such better situations, try to play without rushing and try to fix the weaknesses of your opponent. So B5, B4 is a very the technical way to proceed. Knight D7, so black has nothing to do in this position. I can play rook C7 now. So he played knight D7, rook C7, rook D6, rook A7, and the game is basically over since black is completely tight. So E5, king F3, before doing anything, white just activates his king. The king managed to reach the E3 square, and now he just started collecting the pawns. You see, a symmetrical endgame, but when you know what you are doing and when you manage to implement the correct exchanges, you can win quite easily in such positions. Very quickly, I want to show one of the games played by one of the biggest specialists in these endgames, Ulf Andersson. This is also a very instructive example, which shows White's idea in a very clear way. So just a second. Okay, this is another typical Catalan endgame, and now you can see how important is the C6 square, because the knight occupies this C6 square, and in this way black cannot fight for the D file. Also, rook C8 is impossible because of knight E7. And very often, white just manages to play rook d1, rook d7, rook d1, rook d6, and in this way he penetrates black's position. Also, it's another idea is to penetrate via the C file by playing rook c1, let's say, then knight e5, rook c7. But once again, the c6 knight helps us to win the fight for the C file. So Andersson played rook c1, knight a4, b3, knight b6, and here we should not rush. Just king f3. We can improve the position. You see, we have symmetric structure. Black's pieces are developed, but due to the move b7, b5, black's position is almost lost. For example, one of the ideas is to play knight e5 and rook c6 and just start collecting the pawns. But in such endgames, white can also quickly activate his king by playing king e4, king d4, king c5. Black's pieces are completely tight because of his weak queenside. This is a very typical situation. So he played g5. If you are forced to play a move like g5, okay, we have nothing to say. Knight e5, rook d8, rook c6, knight d7. Now, what will be the move you are going to play with a big pleasure? Yeah, I see that all of you has followed the beginning of the lecture. Yeah, instead of okay, rook d6 is impossible. Just knight e5 and black is winning the rook. So knight d3. Instead of going for a rook endgame with a pawn up, which is also winning knight d3 without giving any chance. Black has no counterplay whatsoever. Knight b8. Once again, you see this problematic knight on b8, and now rook c7. Black is completely tight. So now I want just to play knight e5, just applying the principle of two weaknesses. The a6 pawn is one of the weaknesses, and the f1 pawn is another weakness. So after king g7, he went for knight e5, rook f8, b4. No moves in this position. He starts just playing king g7, king f6. Now rook b7, f4, and Anderson finally played knight takes f7. When he gained some space, when he activated his king, you see how hopeless is the position. He manages to win without giving any chances. Now, I'm going to show an example in which the d3 knight even manages to dominate Black's bishop, which is very interesting, because usually when the play is going on two wings, bishop tends to be stronger. But since in the Catalan structures, in Catalan, the pawn structure is a bit fixed. This is not the case because Black cannot play on the queen side. Only White can play there, and the bishop is usually quite useless. Here is one model game which is played by the British Grandmaster Kate Arel. So just let me go to the critical position. Okay, now we have this game, Kate Arel with White against Richard Waving with Black. So queen takes d4, knight takes d4, bishop g2, king takes g2, knight e5, knight f3, knight takes f3, knight takes f3. And now maybe the computer will say that this position is dead equal and Black has no theoretical problems whatsoever. But since we already know a thing or two about the Catalan structures, we can say that Black should pay attention to this position, because in the future, the weakness of the c6 square can be problematic for Black. What is the plan? White should try to exchange a pair of rooks and bring the knight to d3. In this way, he will reach the model position. And then it's very easy to start putting pressure. So rook c1, as I said, the c file is more important than the d file in this structure. Castle, rook c6, rook c8. Of course, I'm not going to take on a6 because of rook c2. He's going to invade my camp. Rook c1. Okay, that's very good. I managed to exchange one pair of rooks, and the remaining rook of my opponent is quite passive now. What should I do next? The knight will go to the d3 square. King f8, rook b6, rook c7 is impossible because of bishop d6, therefore I'm trying rook b6, but just to notice, the c6 square was the important point because the rook was transferred to b6 via c6. King e8, rook b7, rook c8. Black just tries to obtain some counterplay in this position. Rook c8, rook a7, f6, knight d3. So this is what we want. This is a model position. More active rook, the knight is on d3, and in this position, the knight is stronger than the bishop. Here, you should know an important concept that you will see on multiple occasions. And since this is an important position, I will give you some time to think. What should White play here? You have a typical plan, which will help you to win the game. Yes, actually, we should apply the principle of two weaknesses. The a6 pawn is is a weakness, but uh, with only one weakness, it's impossible to win the game. Therefore, we should look for new targets, possibly on the king side. In such positions, it's very important to also to gain space on the king side. For example, if black manages to play e5 and then king f7, king e6, he's doing pretty well in this position. So the move f4 is a very important part of white's strategy in such endgames. And generally, you want just to penetrate with the king, and you should just start playing on the white squares. For example, you go king f3, king e4, g4, f5. If the opponent goes for e5, then king d5. If not, knight f4 is possible, then knight d5 or knight e6. You just create more targets, and black cannot hold the position. His white squares are especially weak because this bishop can never control the white squares. So king f8, g4, bishop d8, king f3, a5. He just tries to activate his rook, a3, a4, and now f5. The idea is already knight f4. You see how flexible is this d3 knight. E takes f5, g takes f5, bishop e7, of course, rook b7. Now we are winning the pawn, and the white is already winning because we have an extra pawn on the queen side. Also, we can try to generate some threats on the king side by means of knight f4, rook b7, maybe knight e6 or knight d5. Black's king is stuck, therefore the position is easily winning for white. Now, I want to, before proceeding with the ideas related to the c6 square, I wanted to show an example in which you will see that black has some problems to solve, even in positions in which the c6 square is not weak at all. So even if there are no queenside weaknesses, black can experience some technical problems in the Catalan. Just, just let me find this game. Yeah, this is the game Anish Giri, Petar Leko. Here I want to find the critical position. Okay, this is the position which was reached in the game Giri Peter Leko. Of course, in this position, black should be okay because he managed to exchange the white squared bishops. Also, the pawn is on b7, so you don't see weaknesses on the queen side. So if black plays correctly in this position, he should hold. But it's not so easy. For example, how should white start putting pressure in this position? Do you have an idea? Okay, maybe we can give some 30 seconds to think. Okay. I see that most of you forget a very typical and thematic move in these pawn structures. So before proceeding with the game, just let me remind you one very important principle. When you have a symmetrical pawn structure, the activity of the pieces decides the outcome of the game. Therefore, you should try to make your pieces more active. And the only way to achieve this activity is to push the pieces of your opponent by gaining space. In this position, in this structure, if white cannot gain space and push back the pieces of his opponent, the position is equal. So white should start with f3, f4. This is a thematic way of playing in this position. So after that, you can proceed with king f3, maybe g4, h4, g5, maybe knight e5, and our pieces are getting very active. And here, if black knows the structure very well, he can equalize in a very easy way, I think. So remember, because such structure can arise out of many openings, somehow with black you should try to play f5 in order to prevent your opponent from gaining space. Otherwise, you will face some practical problems. So you have two options: knight d5, king f3, and now f5, which is very decent. You have dark squared bishop, and you put your central pawns on white squares. Afterwards, black can proceed with g5 followed by g4. Also, another idea, a bit more artificial, is knight e4, bishop e3, f5. And then king f7, bishop f6. Also, the e4 knight has the advantage of covering the c5 square, which is, you know, a very important square in this pawn structure. So here, after f4, Leko played king f8, which is a surprise because generally Leko has a very good feeling of technical positions. Now king f3, knight d7. He just wants to exchange pieces by means of knight c5. Therefore, Giri played the prophylactic bishop e3. King e8, bishop d4, bishop f6. But now black already faces some practical problems because it's not possible to defend the g7 pawn without accepting some concessions. For example, if you move the g pawn, let's say g6, then g4, h4, h5 will be possible, thus creating a second weakness on the king side. Also, if you play g5, at some point white will have the chance to make a distant passed pawn on the king side by playing f takes g5, h takes g5, h4. Now he played bishop f6, but in these symmetrical structures, it's very difficult. It's very risky for black to leave only knights on the board. Why? As you are going to see on many occasions, knights love space. Therefore, when you have only knights on the board, usually the advantage belongs to the side which has more space. And here, white managed to gain some space by means of f4. Never forget this thematic move. So knight e5, king e7, e4, Anish Giri proceeds by gaining space. And now the f6 knight is a bit restricted. Rook c1, rook c1. You know that this c file is more important than the d file. Now I'm planning to follow with rook c7. Now knight e8, knight d3. We love this d3 square. And if possible, one day we can further expand the position by playing e5, king e4, maybe g4, f5. But also now the idea is a5, just to fix this b7 pawn. Therefore, Leko went for a5. Note that after g5, we have already this idea: take, and h4. And the distant passed pawn will give white a considerable advantage in the arising endgame positions. So a5, rook c5. Giri immediately takes takes advantage of the queenside weaknesses. So now rook b5 can be an issue in some positions. King d6. Here, rook b5 does not do much because of king c7 and maybe b6. Therefore, rook c3, rook a6, e5. He continues to gain space. And here it's very important that the e8 knight is quite stuck in this position, because after king d5, then just rook c8 and the knight will be lost. So king e7, knight c5, rook b6, and what should be the move? Maybe another good 30 seconds to think in this position. Always pay attention to what black wants. Black wants to proceed with knight c7, knight d5. Therefore, rook d3. White just will just penetrate the position of his opponent. Knight c7 is impossible, and there is no defense against rook d7. So rook b2, rook d7, king f8, knight b7, and once again we see an application of the principle of two weaknesses. We have a weak pawn on a5. Also, we have a weakness on f7. Rook b3, king g4, rook b4, knight d8. And here, actually, the game will be lost on the king side. King g8, rook e7, f5, king h5. The white king is going to mate his colleague. King h7, take, and now actually the game ended in a pretty funny way. Rook b2, h3, rook h2, king h4. Okay, the e6 pawn will be lost, and white is just a piece up. You see, guys, how annoying can be white's advantage, even in a position without weaknesses on the queen side. That's why I like playing the Catalan type of positions with white, because in such endgames, computer says that black is okay, and my opponent likes his position in the preparation. But from a practical point of view, there are many technical problems, and that's what I like in the Catalan. I know how to play even the equal endgames. If you are familiar with all these ideas, you will get a tremendous advantage in your practical games. So now, speaking about the knights, I will demonstrate that even without rooks on the board, knight endgames can be very annoying for black. But this time we will have once again weaknesses on the king side. And here let's take a look at one game that I like a lot. This is the game Ulf Andersson against Vladimir Potkin. If you want to master this kind of Catalan endgames, just look at the games of Ulf Andersson. In his games you will find many such endgames. So you have a typical Catalan position: knight b3, rook c8, knight e5, thematic stuff. The knight comes to d3, our favorite square. Rook c1. Andersson is playing with white, as I said. Vladimir Potkin, the Russian grandmaster, is playing with black. Rook d1, queen e7, a3, a5. Okay, not so important. I just want to go to the important position. Here, let me discuss something about the move b4. Actually, this pawn structure is always favorable for white, because in every endgame, the a5 pawn will be a target. Also, in such endgames, white tries to provoke the move b5, b4, because now the knight will get access to the important c4 square. Maybe some of you know that very often in Queen's Gambit Accepted, we have this pawn structure in which black had played b4 and the c4 square is weak. At the end of the lesson, if we have enough time, or maybe it will be in the Q&A session, I will give some examples which are taken from Queen's Gambit Accepted, and you will see how black experiences problems which are quite typical for the Catalan. So a4, rook c6, rook c5, making use of the c5 square, take, and here Vladimir Potkin went for rook c8. But I was today I was curious when preparing the lecture. I was curious about this move, queen b6. Let's suppose that we exchange the queens, then we exchange the rooks. This is a very important endgame, because if you play, let's say, Queen's Gambit Accepted with black, or if you play the Catalan with black, you will have such endgames for sure. And when you are white, you should know how to play. You should know the endgame is equal and the draw is obvious. But actually, it's not so easy. Just a second. There was a small technical issue. Can you hear my voice now? Okay. Okay, now everyone can hear my voice. What is the last thing that I said? I was speaking about this knight endgame, right? Okay. Okay, so here, as I said, you should know how to play for a win in this endgame, and if you're with black, you should know how to defend. And I want to share my analysis. F3, knight b6, b3, obvious stuff, knight d7, king f2, king f8, king e3, king e7, king d4, king d6, knight b2. You see how important is this c4 square, which was weakened by the move b4. e5, king d3, knight c5, king c2. Everything is pretty logical. Maybe not the most forced sequence, but pretty logical moves. King e7, knight c4, knight b7, e4, h5, king d2, f6, king e3. So the a5 pawn is weak. This is one weakness, but I can never win if I don't provoke a second weakness. How should black defend in this position? Oh, and we will see what can go wrong. Maybe you can try to think for 1 minute just to find the defense, because in your practice you're likely to have such position. Yeah, I see some very good suggestions. Yeah, the right move is g5, just preventing white from gaining space on the king side. But let's see what can go wrong. Let's suppose that black just plays king e7 and king e6. Let's suppose that he just doesn't know the end game. h4, f4, g6, king f3, and now you have a strange kind of a zugzwang. So the knight is tied to the defense of the a5 pawn. Also, the king needs to protect the e5 pawn. So e takes f4, no move. King takes f4, king e7, only the king can play. Now e5, take g4, and now it's it seems that to the weakness of the G6 pawn, the king will be tied to this weakness. The white king will manage to penetrate black's camp. So king f3, king f, king f, and you can never go like this because which arises from some opening. You should make such analysis because in this way, by making deep analysis of the end game, you will learn better your openings. You will know how to hold the arising endgame positions. I believe that the sound is okay. My internet connection is good. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, does everything work now? There was a small technical problem, and if it arises again, we will find the solution. I will just change the internet connection, and we're going to make the lecture a bit longer. You know, when your wife always some similar problems can arise. Sorry about. We're going to compensate you for this technical mistake. Okay, so let's just summarize. In this endgame, black has some serious problems because Zugzwang positions can arise. As I said, if you have followed here, the black will be in Zugzwang. The white king manages to penetrate the black's position due to the weakness of the G6 pawn. So the king can just go to E3 and then king D4, king D5. So in this position, white is basically winning because king G4 can never be played since knight E5 is possible. The weakness of the G6 pawn is quite important in this position. So the black should play G5, as many of you pointed out, without allowing white to go for F4. And if F4, then G4. And since black has a lot of space on the king side, there is no Zugzwang. Black can just wait by playing king f6 and king e6. The game continued in another way. So he played rook c8, queen a5, rook a8, queen b5, queen takes b5, a takes b5, rook b8, rook c1, rook takes b5. Now, this endgame is also very problematic for black because even here, the b4 pawn is a big problem, is a big weakness. Also, white has access to this c4 square, while the position of the d5 knight is not stable. Anderson played rook c8, king h7, e4, knight f6, f3. This is a typical construction in such kind of endgames. These pawns, f3 and t4, just manage to restrict the f6 knight. And now white can easily centralize his king, then rook c4, he can start attacking the b4 pawn. And for black, what is the best idea to create counterplay in this structure? Do you know this thematic structure? Yes, I already see the right answer. G5 with the idea of G4. And when you are white and your opponent goes for G5, then you can just play G, just to stop any G4 ideas. Rook B7, because now rook C7 can be an issue. The king will go to d4, king, knight e5. Once again, white applies the principle of two weaknesses. The b4 pawn is weak and the f7 pawn is weak. So rook b7, king f2, h5, h3, take, b3, knight c5, king e3, king g7, rook b8, and now Anderson managed to win the b3 pawn and the game. You see how important is to provoke the move b4, b5, b4. Later on, Black will have a hard time to compensate his weaknesses. Now, I want to discuss some cases in which Black does not manage to play c5. The pawn remains on c7, and white manages to block the c7 pawn in the endgame. And here I want to one very instructive game. This is the game Fabiano Caruana, Sergei Karyakin. So this is the line, bishop d6, a3. In his lecture, Boris Avuk said that this bishop d6 line is very modern nowadays. And of course, you see players like Karyakin is opting for it. Knight d7, b4. We have a case in which Black cannot play c5, and therefore every endgame will be problematic for him. Of course, this does not mean that Black's position is worse. In general, Black is trying not to play an endgame. He is going for dynamic options. Most often he will prepare the advance e7, e5, and he will strive for a position with rich piece play. So rook a7, bishop c3, bishop e4, rook, queen c1, queen a8, typical stuff. We are not going into details. Knight e1, just playing for e4, and later on we are going to exchange pieces. Yes, let's go straight to the end game. And here, queen f3, queen takes f3, knight takes f3. This is a typical endgame position. If you have a similar endgame, it means that things had gone wrong for Black. Because plays c5, and white's play is pretty straightforward. The typical one in such endgames is quite simple. You should try to block the c7 pawn, maybe by putting a knight on c6. It can be even a rook. And then you just start advancing your pawn majority on the king side. And actually, we can say that this position is already white. So rook e8, rook d1, knight b6. What Black wants and what should white do? Now you should just think prophylactically. Yes, I see that you are getting the correct answer. Of course, almost everyone is saying the correct answer. Of course, Black wants to play knight c4, therefore we're going for knight a5. g6, e3, of course we don't rush. King g7, rook d3, rook c8. Now, when Black wants to play c5, maybe not now, we should block the pawn. Maybe he can play bishop f8 and then c5. Therefore, rook c6 is a very good move, creating the threat of rook d takes d6. Rook b8, king f1. Okay, the king can go to e2. Knight d2. Knight b3, just improving the pieces. And here, when everything is ready, you start advancing your central pawns. Later on, king f3, e4, e5. In this pawn structure, white is winning. rook e8, king f3, rook d8, rook c2, once again e4, king e8, e5, bishop e7. Exchanging one pair of rooks is always good in order to eliminate the counterplay of our opponent. Rook d2, king e8. Now the knight will penetrate the c6 square. Knight a5. This knight controls the c4 square in order to restrict any counterplay. You see that of black's pieces is currently participating in the game, and now king e4, g4, f5, f6 is possible. Just squeezing our opponents. Karyakin played f5, and here it's the right moment to open a second front, second battlefield by means of g4. Take, f takes g4, king takes g4, king f7. Now we have the h file for the rook, bishop f8, f5. White is practically playing a pawn up. Knight d5, f6. And okay, here black sacrificed the knight, but it doesn't help. White is winning. So a very important structure. Let me just summarize the right plan in such situations. First of all, you will make sure that the c pawn cannot move. Ideally, you are going to block the pawn with a piece, and then you will start pushing your central pawns. You will put your central pawn majority into motion. Let's take a look at one more game featuring this pawn structure. This is the game John Ludwig Hammer against Vasily Ivanchuk. Okay, we have this opening variation: bishop b7, bishop d2, bishop e4, queen c1, bishop b7, queen c2, rook a7, rook c1, bishop e4, queen b3, bishop d5, queen e3. This is a known theoretical line. Queen e3 is an important move. White just creates an opposition between the queen and the rook. And now there is a tactical problem for black, which is a known trap. You will also find it in the database of Mikhail Marin. If black plays knight c6, then rook takes c6, bishop takes c6, d5. And actually the rook is failing, will fall. So knight d7. Here in these pawn structures, whenever the knight goes to d7, you should play bishop a5 just to prevent c5. Bishop d6, knight c3, bishop b7, and here, what is the best option for white? What do you think? Okay, many of you say b4, but for the moment, black cannot play c5. Yeah, now I got the correct answer. Okay, b4 is a decent move, of course. It can always be played, but I think that going into an endgame by playing knight g5 is a good strategy, because after exchanging the white squared bishops, white will be able to profit from the weakness of the c6 square. So take, rook a, queen a8. How to proceed here? You have only 30 seconds. What is the best move? Of course, queen f3, exchanging queens, queen f3, king f3. And here it turns out that the move c5 does not work tactically because of knight e4. And after knight takes e4, knight takes e4, and the c5 pawn will be lost. So black played e5, e3, bishop e7, and here, okay, I can say the move immediately, but we'll give you 30 seconds to think on your own because John Ludwig Ham played a really good move from a technical perspective. What do you think is the best decision for whites? Actually, he went for knight e2, opening the c file for the rook, and later on the knight will manage to reach the c6 square via d4. This is quite a typical idea in these endgames. So rook e8, king g2. He wants to free the f3 square for the knight. Knight d5, knight f3, bishop d6, keeping the e5 pawn. And here it's possible just to transpose to the structure that we already know. And here we have a thematic endgame position. What is the right plan in this position? First of all, it's important to prevent the idea of our opponent. Our opponent wants to play c5 and then c4. He wants to put his queenside majority into motion. Therefore, we start with knight c6. And then our idea is to gradually prepare the advance of our kingside pawn majority. For example, first of all, he starts with a rook c2 in order to make sure that the position of this knight is stable, and then to prepare rook d1, because it turns out that the open file will be the d file. Knight b6. Now we make the typical restricting move b3, king f8, rook d1. In this structure, first of all, before start moving your pawn majority, try to take the d file under control. King e8, now knight d4, and here, since the rook is already on f6, what will be the right decision? What is the right way to proceed? Yeah, or e4. Just start the pawns just start rolling. Rook g6, e4, e5. Sorry, it's impossible to take because of rook e2 and f4. Bishop e7, queen takes rook takes c7, knight d5, rook b7, and white is just winning. You see how easy you can win even against a very strong player if you know the thematic ideas in such pawn structures. Yeah, here the game just went for a few more moves. Bishop d8, knight f5, knight f4, king f3, take, then rook d7, tremendous piece activity, and here after king e4, Ivanchuk resigned. Just a second, I see a question. Did black have rook e3 instead of knight b6? Knight b6, in which moment? Here. Aha, rook e3. Maybe I have the intermediate rook d1. Yeah, unfortunately for black, white is not forced to take. But even if I take, I think that the knight will be trapped. For example, take, king f3, knight c2, rook c1, and I just trap the knight. So white is actually winning in many ways. And at the end, I want to cover an endgame which is not which is very typical recently. This endgame is not classical Catalan endgame and was not popular for a long period of time, but this endgame arises out of a variation that is becoming very popular recently. There, I just want to share some insights concerning this endgame. Just a second. d4, d5, knight f3, knight f6. This is a game of the Hungarian grandmaster Banush. if I don't know if I pronounce it correctly. Okay, this is the wine with knight c3. As Boris Avukh shared in his lecture, this wine is currently becoming very, very popular. After d takes c4, knight e5, knight c6, take, knight c6, queen e8, queen, knight takes c7, queen takes c7, queen a4, c5. Okay, these are the most logical moves, because if black does not play c5, I will take the pawn. Maybe I will play f3, e4, bishop e3, short castle, and black will remain with his structural weaknesses. Therefore, black tries to generate some active play. c5, take on c5, bishop e3, queen c7, castle, bishop b7, f3. And this is currently a very topical position, which is being tested on the highest level. After knight d5, bishop d4. What is White's strategy in this position? First of all, I want to say that this is a risk-free position for White, because the effectively we can always defend it by means of rook d2. We can always defend it by means of rook d2, or if needed, queen a3 is possible. But the most important factor about this position is the presence of the opposite colored bishops. Therefore, White's strategy is based on advancing the kingside pawns. For example, later on he can play g4, h4, g5, h5, g6, and so in some positions it's possible to create attacking prospects on the kingside. So here we have also an interesting endgame which often arises. After rook d8, e4, take, queen c5, queen a5, we have a typical endgame with opposite colored bishops. What do you think about this position? How can you evaluate the arising endgame position? Yeah, I see that. I see that most of you think that this endgame is slightly better for White. Yes, actually, in this endgame, White is slightly better, because Black's bishop is restricted by this pawn chain f3 and e4. c4 pawn can be a weakness, and the White king can easily be activated via king c2, king c3, maybe king b4, king b5. The c4 pawn is in danger. Of course, this move, bishop a5, is important just to take control of the d file. And as always, in order to restrict the counterplay of our opponent, we should just exchange one pair of rooks. So rook d3, rook takes d3, c takes d3, king d2 was played, bishop a6, rook c1. And here Black should exchange the rooks, because otherwise I'm going to penetrate the position of my opponent by means of rook c7, maybe put the bishop on d4, start moving the queenside pawns. Black's position is already very dangerous. Rook c8, rook takes c8, bishop takes c8, king takes d3, and okay, this endgame is problematic. Is already problematic for Black, because we have a pawn majority on the queen side, and White can also try to create a second weakness on the king side. Later on, White managed to win this position, since the endgame is unpleasant for Black. I just wanted to get back to the basic position of the variation and ask another question. Okay, we have seen that White has good attacking prospects in the middle game. So by playing bishop d4 and start advancing your kingside pawns, you can generate some threats on the dark squares. But what is the fundamental advantage of this opening approach for White is that in every position, the exchange of the queens is favorable for you. For example, if we exchange the queens now in this position, if we remove the queens from the board, black's position is will be very difficult. So the perfect play for us, the perfect end game will be to exchange the queens, exchange one pair of rooks, and exchange the knight of our opponent, ideally for our bishop. And then the rook will penetrate black's position, the king will go to the b4 square, and white's advantage will be tremendous. Of course, if you analyze this position deeply enough with a computer, you will see that the computer manages to prove some equality, but in general, it's not so easy to memorize all these lines when you're playing with black. And from a practical perspective, this is a risk-free approach for whites. Therefore, if I recommend you to consider playing this line with knight c3 for white, because it requires less time to study, and you are not risking much. You will have this objectively equal risk-free position in which you can try to either attack on the king side by using a typical strategy for opposite covered bishops, or you can go for an endgame by exchanging the queens. This is somewhat a practical approach. So just a second. Is the knight c3 Marin's Catalan database? No, in his Catalan database, Marin is advocating this approach for white: c4, e6, g3, bishop e7, bishop g2, castle, d takes c4, queen a4. This is his main recommendation, and I hope that in my today's lecture, I managed to convince you that the arising equal positions are not so equal. And white's play is always a bit more pleasant. It's a bit easier to handle this position, these positions when you are playing with whites. Of course, guys, there are many examples which I included in my database for the lecture, and I was not able to show. But you should know that all the examples will be in the PGN file, which will be provided after 1 week. So tomorrow you will have the recordings of the camp, and 1 week, maybe after 1 week, maybe next Monday, you will have the PGN version of the lectures, and in this PGN version, you will have much more examples and you will have examples which were not covered during the training sessions. So now, if you have some questions about my lecture, I will be very glad to answer. Once again, sorry for the technical problems. At some moment, my internet connection was not stable. But I hope that you enjoyed the Catalan Endgames, and you want to try them as whites. So if you have some questions, I'm ready to answer. Is there a good reference or book for this early knight c3? Actually, this direction is quite new, and I don't know many good sources. For the moment, yeah, I'm not sure if there is some interesting something interesting related to knight c3. Maybe this will be the subject of some of our future modern chess projects. Okay, if you don't have more questions, then my partner Peter Arnaudov will join us, and we will start our Q&A session after the camp.